Welcome back to Historical Context. Today we continue our series on Virginia during the Restoration. Today's episode picks up at the end of Bacon's Rebellion, which we had talked about for several weeks. Certainly an exciting event in terms of the information, the insight. We heard directly from Nathaniel Bacon. He died of dysentery, which helped William Berkeley retake the colony. And with the rebellion subdued, the English commissioners arrive to bring new perspective into the affairs of the colony. They're there to look at why this rebellion happened. And the commissioners find grievances throughout the colony, and they actually basically divide them up into each county that exists in Virginia. The commission started in Gloucester County, where they found the tax on tobacco as a source of discontent amongst the residents there. The commissioners answered that the funds were necessary, but the funds could be addressed with the assembly as 1,000 pounds tobacco were retained by the governor. So if you want to take those 1,000 pounds and spend them elsewhere, you're more than welcome to address it through the assembly, but England needs the rest of that money. Another grievance in Gloucester County was the murder of colonists by the natives. The commissioners opted to escalate this issue directly to King Charles II. It is essentially a foreign policy issue for England to deal with now that they're trying to rebuild that relationship back with the natives. In some cases, the Gloucester County grievances had misconceptions embedded in them. For example, arms and ammunition were prohibited from being sold during the rebellion as a pro-temp measure. But colonists believed that this law was permanent, not just during the rebellion, and they complained about it to the commissioners. In Norfolk County, a request was made to transport tobacco to English plantations without a fee. So they said, hey, can we transport this stuff without paying for it? The commissioners called this request mutinous and contrary to His Majesty's orders. So there's some finding here of the discontent being, or I should say the discontent creating a disconnect between the expectations of the colonists and the English. One of the grievances requested that natives taken as prisoners in the rebellion be made into slaves. Another grievance requested that the county records be free and open to the public. The February 1677 General Assembly made the sale of arms and ammunition amongst the colonists legal trade. And we just talked about that grievance before. The Assembly also granted a handful of pardons against Bacon's former leaders, and public funding was made available to widows and families of those loyal to Berkeley who were killed in battle during the rebellion. The Assembly also set prices on a bundle of goods and set aside land for the planting of corn, and this was likely done in response to the colony's economic hardship. This rebellion likely made things even much worse, so now the colony is managing prices, trying to work on supply, trying to get things back together. The Assembly also decides to air its grievances to the commissioners. The Assembly complains that they are losing colonists to Maryland due to Maryland's promise of land. They complain that their servants escape and the cost to retrieve them exceeds the cost of their servitude. People heavily in debt are also fleeing the colony to escape their debts. They complain the natives are continuing to harass them. They complain that the Isle of Kent should belong to them. That issue was talked about on this podcast, and it was 45 years ago, and they complained about it. That's kind of funny. Despite the complaints, letters of thankfulness are sent to His Majesty and Lord Arlington for assisting in the colony's affairs. Additionally, the Grand Assembly responds to some of the grievances recorded in the various counties, but no real reforms are passed. The commissioners themselves may have responded to some of these things, but they did not rule on any of the grievances. They did not have power to pass laws. Instead, they would refer them to the appropriate governing body, whether it be the governor, his council, the General Assembly, or the king himself. The tone starts to change in March of 1677. Several pieces of correspondence in that month from the commissioners chastised Governor Berkeley for hastily executing the Bacon rebels and seizing estates without a formal process. Governor Berkeley basically writes in return that he did not agree with the commissioners. Doesn't agree, doesn't care. On March 27th, 1677, the commissioners sent a letter back to England criticizing the General Assembly for not taking any action and criticizing the executions of rebels taking place. They also make a comment on Governor Berkeley. Let's have a look at the writing. Berkeley might impose on the ignorant his own terms and conditions, as nevertheless he has endeavored to do. They have been mistaken or deceived in their former character of Berkeley. He has since appeared much contrary to his first professions. While Berkeley continues governor upon this place, things will never be put into that peaceable posture and happy composure desired, and by commander endeavored for it in his only artifice to persuade the people that Colonel Jeffreys is but his deputy, and that he shall next year return governor again. He is actually leaving the colony according to this letter. So he wants Colonel Jeffreys to be his deputy. He's leaving to go to England. He shall return next year and continue as governor. The commissioners are clearly losing faith in Governor Berkeley. They go on to summarize ongoing complaints against Berkeley, being his seizures of estates without proper trial, disruption of normal assembly hearings, and the use of public money. Colonel Herbert Jeffreys, who was mentioned in the writing, deputy governor, would send his own letter with two others advocating for the execution of rebels, defending those actions as a reduction of future mutiny and rebellion. On April 2nd, Philip Ludwell penned a letter on behalf of the General Assembly expressing thanks to the king and support for Governor Berkeley. A similar letter was written that day to the Duke of York, Lord Arlington, and others in senior positions of English government. A letter expressing the grievances of the Assembly, which I discussed earlier, was also drafted and sent to Secretary of State Joseph Williamson. He was back in England. At the same time, formal requests were coming into the Burgesses from different parts of the colony. From Norfolk, the colonists requested a suspension of tobacco duties. Northumberland wanted trade with the natives prohibited, with the death penalty as a punishment. They also wanted delinquent estates converted over to those who lost assets during the native attacks and rebellions. Surrey County wanted free elections for each assembly and wanted assemblies to be called only once every 2 years, which was less often than they currently were. They also requested a reduction in Burgesses' salaries and a public accounting of taxes and expenditures. On April 5th, the commissioners complained that the Assembly agreed to pay Governor Berkeley, but no progress had been made on peace with the natives. On April 13th, another letter to Secretary of State Williamson from William Sherwood, remember him from last week, states that the general cry of the country was against the governor, and as long as Berkeley remained in power, the colony would not be quiet. Wow, things have really turned against William Berkeley. Sometime around April 20th, Governor Berkeley decides to leave for England to plead his case. So he was planning on leaving anyways, but now at this point, he decides, I've got to go to England to plead my case as governor. Some historians say that he was called back by King Charles, but no concrete writings say really whether he was or not. A letter to him on April 21st referred to his, quote, farewell leave. On April 23rd, the commissioners wrote to Governor Berkeley about how offended they were regarding his reaction to their presence in the colony. This letter, in my opinion, lays credence to the idea that Berkeley left voluntarily. Why would they write that letter if the king was calling him back? Berkeley did respond to the commissioner's letter by indicating that such falsehoods that they were spreading are what led to the death of King Charles I. Wow. I mean, that is pretty inflammatory if you think about it, and if you've been following this podcast for a while. William Berkeley would leave for England on April 27, 1677. Colonel Herbert Jeffreys, his deputy, would serve in his absence. Berkeley would return to England to fight for his honor, but would fall ill shortly after his return. Governor Berkeley would die in England later in 1677, making Herbert Jeffreys the next governor of the colony. William Berkeley served as the colony's governor for 27 years across 2 different stints. He was 72 years old when he died. So now with Berkeley's death, what does England's government do? Do they stay with Colonel Jeffreys? Do they bring in a new face? Do they decide on sweeping reforms? We'll find out next time on Historical Context.